Let's bring in Kyle Spencer, author of the new book, Raising Them Right, The Untold Story of America's Ultra-Conservative Youth Movement and Its Plot for Power. It's great to have you with us here in studio. So just tell us, how has the GOP been able to cultivate this youth movement and make it a force in the mobilization of the modern GOP?
So the most important thing to understand about the young GOP and the organized movement of young conservatives is that it has been in the works for years. This is something that conservatives started working on in the 60s and 70s, comes from Barry Goldwater's loss, that far back. Guys coming to Washington and saying, we got to win, we got to take back this country. And we've seen this movement very cohesive, very collaborative, a lot of cooperation between young conservatives and older conservatives, and tons of money being put into this.
It doesn't seem, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem to be motivated by policies as much as it is by cultural issues. It seems that, and because intuitively you would think that some of the policies of the Democratic Party would appeal to young voters, but in this case, the Republicans are using cultural war issues to draw these young followers.
Yeah, I mean, this movement really started originally, and as we know, kind of older conservatives really had a movement and had very serious ideas and ideology, small government, independence, family, all that type of thing. But nowadays, what we see works much better in luring young people to conservatism is to just focus on culture war issues, because it is true that when you really look at the Democratic platform, it's much more sensitive and much more supportive of young people. So it's let's focus on a kind of tribalism. And we see that kind of tribalism in our politics across the board anyway, so it actually works really quite well on a campus where kids tend to be kind of cliquey.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about Charlie Kirk. It's a name that I was asking about in our break, but he's a conservative force. You talk about him in your book a little bit. He's made controversial comments. I think this week he said there is an anti-white campaign going on in the country, and being trans is worse than blackface. How did he get this platform?
So Charlie Kirk came from a high school in the suburbs of Chicago that was Browning. That was actually a school, when he got there, he'd flipped from a mostly white school to a mostly black and Latino school. And, I can't know how that made him feel, but it is true that his status as a white guy was diminishing in his neighborhood and across the board. He, of course, also was just down the street from Obama, who he really hated. He had, a lot of young people at that time really felt quite a bit of resentment. Is Charlie one of those people? Unclear, but I suspect that was one of his motivators. Nowadays, when Charlie Kirk talks about racism, the racism that really gets him fired up and really concerns him and really worries him is racism against white people. And wow, he's really on top of that and really thinks it's a huge problem.
Let me ask you about another person, controversial figure, Candace Owens. You talk about her in your book as well. Is she somebody who you think believes genuinely what she says and what she does, or has she found this little niche in the conservative movement as a minority voice who can confirm some of the conservative ideas that they want to hear from a young black woman, and using it to make money? Yeah,
so she's a kind of complicated figure, and I kind of have two answers to that. On the one hand, she's a celebrity looking for something to latch on to. So on some level, I would argue that if she thought that she would become more successful being a liberal, she'd probably be a liberal. But it is also true that she had some instances in high school in which she felt that she had a kind of incident where some young people, said some racial things to her, and it blew up in her community, and she felt like some left-leaning activists really used her. And so this kind of idea that black people are used by the Democrats, and something that she speaks often about, does come from her own personal experience, but she's also found that it really resonates. And the other thing that's important about Candace that I think people don't always understand is she's not really there to lure other black voters. She's there to make white conservative voters feel like it's okay. She's a black voice who thinks we're okay, so therefore we must not be racist.
Yeah, I was going to say, in some ways it's kind of the same thread that we're seeing with Herschel Walker. They like what he's saying because in some ways it makes the white voters feel okay about the positions and policies that they're adopting. Let me ask you about the rhetoric and where it leads us, because we've seen the consequences of hateful rhetoric, as we saw on January the 6th, and where that takes this country. Where do you think the rhetoric of people like Charlie Kirk and others take us? I mean, he's denounced certain acts that have happened but generally, where do you think it moves us?
Well, when I first started reporting on Charlie Kirk in 2018, he was still, he was a Trumpy guy, but he was not nearly as radical as he is now. And I really saw that evolution up close. Nowadays, he talks, he uses the terms of terminology they all use. They refer to the Biden administration as a regime. They talk a lot about revolution. Charlie Kirk will go to a church, as he did at one point, telling people that guns are part of their, as an appendage. It's part of their, it's very, very radical speak, and it's hard to think that it's not meant to kind of rile people up and to normalize violent thinking and to normalize kind of revolutionary thinking. I think creating this kind of chaos, this rage, and this anger is going to work for Republicans. I think Democrats think, we think, well, they won't go that far. They will go that far. And I think we saw that with January 6th. You've got these foot soldiers that if you rile them up enough, they're rearing to go.
Kyle Spencer, the book is called Raising Them Right, The Untold Story of America's Ultra-Conservative Youth Movement and Its Plot for Power. Fascinating conversation. Thank you so much, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you so much for having me.